A mechanic. A simple life, hands stained with motor oil, a man living quietly in a small town. A billionaire. A woman hardened by the chaos of the big city, powerful, distant, untouchable. Their paths crossed because of a broken car. But this wasn't just about an engine failing. It was about shaking the very foundation of their lives. She trusted him. He protected her. But could they run from what was pulling them together? As betrayal lurked in the shadows and danger closed in, how far could a man and a woman trust each other? There was one thing money couldn't buy: a real connection. And sometimes, the greatest wealth is finding the one who truly sees you. Please like and subscribe to support us. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. The narrow streets of the town were enveloped in a chilling silence under the cover of night. The wind rustled the branches of the trees, gently swaying the old wooden signs. Liam Carter, feeling the fatigue of the day, was preparing to close the garage shutters when he heard a distant engine sound that broke the silence of the night. The sound lasted a few seconds and suddenly stopped. An uneasy feeling stirred inside him. Something wasn't right. With a suspicious sense, he grabbed his keys and jumped into his car, following the sound. On the side of the road, a luxury car, worn but still impressive, was steaming from the hood. When the woman emerged from it, she appeared under the dim streetlight, and he saw her black dress gently fluttering in the wind. She was tall and elegant, but there was a deep weariness in her face. It was as though not only her car, but her soul was stranded on the road. The woman took out her phone from her bag and began typing, but her face quickly fell. It was clear there was no signal. As she scanned her surroundings, a faint sense of unease seemed to linger in the air. Liam pulled his car up near hers and got out. "Is there a problem?" he asked, his voice calm but attentive. The woman looked up at him. Her eyes held a deep, mysterious sadness, as if a heavy shadow from the past was following her. With a slight sigh, she said, "I think the engine overheated." Her voice was calm, but there was a hidden panic in it, as if she feared spending the night here. Liam walked up to the hood and lightly checked it with his hand. The heat of the engine hit his palms. Shaking his head, he said calmly, "The radiator's busted. It won't work in this condition. It needs to cool down at least until morning." The woman looked around, and the night seemed to grow even darker. This part of town was almost completely deserted. A faint sense of unease spread across her face. "I don't want to spend the night here," she almost whispered. Liam studied her carefully. He could sense she wasn't just a random traveler. Something was off. She didn't seem like someone who had gotten lost. More like someone running from something. Taking a deep breath, he said, "My garage is nearby. I can tow it and fix it." The woman hesitated for a moment. Her eyes locked onto Liam's like two unknowns shining in the dark. Should she trust him? Should she run? Then, with a short but decisive nod, she agreed. "Okay," she said, her voice barely a whisper. They took the car to the garage. The place felt old but still alive, dominated by the smell of oil and metal. The dim light stretched the shadows of heavy chains hanging from the ceiling and rusted engine parts piled in the corners. Liam, as usual, focused on his work, lifting the hood and examining the engine. The woman, meanwhile, silently wandered around the garage, inspecting the old tools lined up on the shelves, the engine parts marked by years of wear. Each one seemed to tell a story. She lightly ran her fingers over a rusty wrench, then turned her gaze toward Liam. "Is this yours?" she asked, her voice soft but curious. Without lifting his head, Liam answered without letting his focus break. "No, it belonged to an old friend. I used to come here as a kid and watch the engines. For hours. Back then, this place felt like a whole world to me." He smiled faintly as if touched by an old memory. "I always dreamed of working here." The woman caught that brief expression on Liam's face and tilted her head slightly. "And now you're here," she said with a warm smile. Liam paused for a moment, then shrugged and nodded slightly. "Sometimes dreams find you," he said, still working on the engine. "Sometimes we force them to come to us." The woman, feeling the depth in his words, shifted her gaze to his hands. Oil-stained, worn but strong and determined hands. The hands that carried his life, his effort, maybe even his dreams. Unconsciously, she whispered a thought that passed through her mind. Sometimes a person doesn't even know what they're chasing. Liam looked up and met her gaze. For a brief moment, his eyes locked with hers. In that instant, the smell of motor oil in the garage, the rusty sound of old tools, and the howling cold wind outside all seemed to vanish. There were only the two of them. And the unspoken words. Hours later, under the dim lights of the garage, Liam placed the last piece into place and took a deep breath while wiping his oil-stained hands with a cloth. The engine was running smoothly now. It had been a tiring but satisfying job. The woman had been patiently standing in a corner, watching him. She had spent the entire night in the garage without a single complaint. Now she slowly took a few steps toward him, pulled out her wallet and took out a thick wad of money, offering it to him. "This is for your work," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. Liam glanced at the money, then shook his head slightly, raising his hand. "Pay it forward," he said simply. The woman paused. She gave him a deep look. There was something unfamiliar in Liam's eyes. A kindness without expectation, without calculation. Perhaps the kind of humanity she hadn't seen in a long time. "People don't usually think this way," she said, furrowing her brow slightly. Liam smiled faintly. "I'm not most people." The woman hesitated for a moment more, then with a slight nod, she put the money back. She seemed like she had something more to say, but the words didn't come. Silently, she got into her car and closed the door. But before she drove away, she glanced at Liam once more. It was as if something inside her had stopped her. A deep, meaningful look. "See you," she said in a low but definite voice. Liam couldn't help but wonder as he watched the car drive away. Would they meet again? The woman didn't belong here, she didn't feel like a part of this town. Yet she had stirred something in Liam. A brief but striking encounter. And some encounters are never just confined to one night. Liam stretched as he lifted the garage shutters early in the morning. The sun was just beginning to warm the narrow streets of the town. The workday was starting, at least that's what he thought. Just as he was about to step inside and get to his daily tasks, he noticed a luxury car silently pulling up in front of the garage. He squinted. For a moment he felt like he was dreaming. It was the same woman. But this time she was different. Her black, elegant dress had been replaced by tight jeans and a white shirt with the buttons slightly undone. The cold, distant air from last night seemed to have disappeared. She looked more relaxed, yet just as determined. She opened the door and stepped out of the car, still holding herself with a certain strength. But there was something entirely different in her eyes, a curiosity, perhaps a desire to test something. Just as Liam was about to speak, the woman extended her hand. "Let me shake your hand," she said, her voice clear and firm. Liam stared at her in surprise. "My name is Abigail Montgomery." Liam's eyes widened without him realizing it. That name. It echoed in his mind for a moment. Montgomery Holding. One of the largest companies in the country. A woman legendary in the world of finance and technology. A name often heard in the newspapers, the business world, even on TV programs. And now, here she was, standing before him. The mysterious woman who had spent the night in his garage with a broken car was actually one of the country's most powerful businesswomen. Liam, trying to hide his shock, slowly extended his hand and shook hers. "So, you're Abigail Montgomery?" he said quietly. Abigail smiled faintly, but her gaze remained serious. "Why are you here?" Liam asked, his voice still somewhat cautious. Abigail took a deep breath, her eyes briefly locking with his. "Because honesty is a rare thing these days," she said sincerely. "And I have an offer for you." Liam raised his eyebrows. A vague curiosity mixed with cautious excitement stirred within him. What could Abigail Montgomery possibly offer him? Liam squinted at the file, then glanced at Abigail. His words were heavy, realistic, but also complex. "Protect me, Liam." This was not what he expected. "Why?" he asked, not bothering to hide the doubt in his voice. Abigail crossed her arms in front of her and leaned back slightly. She took a deep breath and spoke without looking away. "My world is dangerous," she said bluntly. "People will do anything for money. There are people betraying me and my company, and I can't trust them. But I trust you." Liam raised an eyebrow. "You don't even know me." Abigail tilted her head slightly with a bitter smile. "True. But there's one thing I know. I have too many reasons not to trust everyone I know. And I have no reason not to trust you." The silence in the garage turned into an almost deafening wait for a moment. Outside, a light breeze was blowing, and the sounds of distant car engines could be heard. But in the middle of this conversation, it felt like the world had stopped. Abigail opened the file in front of her and placed it on the table. "This job has turned me into someone else, Liam. I'm capable, I know how to run my business. But there's one thing I can't do. I can't read people. I can feel who's really on my side, who's digging my grave, but I can't be sure." Liam saw a hidden weariness in her eyes. She was a strong woman, but also worn, on edge. Abigail continued, her voice becoming even more serious. "I want to hire you. All I ask is that you find out what's going on. Quietly, while I'm not around, I want to know their plans. Who's betraying me? Who's making moves against me? I want you to learn it. I want an invisible hand to protect me in my world." Liam, weighing the words in his mind, listened as Abigail added the final part. "And in return, I'll pay you enough to live your dreams." It was a huge offer. But more than that, it was the sincerity in Abigail's voice. A CEO unexpectedly trusting a man she didn't even know. Liam tilted his head slightly. "Will those people hurt you?" Abigail answered without breaking her gaze. "They're trying to eliminate me." He hadn't expected such a clear, calm response. There was a moment of silence. Liam took a deep breath, his shoulders tensing. "Why me? Why do you trust me?" Abigail looked at him with a soft smile. There was neither fear nor doubt in her eyes. "Why wouldn't I trust you?" she asked, her voice soft, but with a deep meaning behind it. "I learned last night that you're not one of those men who can be bought. And right now, I have a ton of reasons not to trust everyone in my company." Liam stared at her for a moment. Something stirred inside him. This was the strangest job offer a garage mechanic could ever receive. But at the same time, maybe it was opening the door to a new beginning he'd never considered. Was this offer just a job? Or was fate playing an unexpected game with Liam Carter? Liam paused for a moment, lowering his gaze to the file. He didn't know what was written inside, but one thing was certain. This wasn't an ordinary job. There was a feeling rising within him. He wasn't sure exactly what it was, but it wasn't something he could turn down. Finally, after taking a deep breath, he gripped the file. "Then let's help." His words echoed in the garage, carrying the weight of his decision. As soon as he heard his own voice, he realized that something had already begun. Abigail seemed to have been waiting for him to make this choice. She tilted her head slightly with a faint smile, but there was a glimmer in her eyes, part relief, part cautious optimism. "You made the right choice, Liam." Liam gripped the file tightly, trying to suppress the strange unease inside him. Was this just a job? Logically, he was stepping into a dangerous world. But it wasn't just about that. Abigail. His instinct to protect her still fought within him. Part of him whispered that this wasn't just a job, that it would become far too personal for him. But the other part. He didn't want the adventure with her to end here. He wasn't even at the point where he could admit this to himself. Not yet. For now. He was just helping. Liam's life began to change the moment he picked up that file, but the real transformation happened when his true identity vanished, replaced by someone else. Abigail arranged for him to stay in a luxurious, modern apartment near the company. With large windows where he could see the city lights at night, a living space designed with care in every corner. But for Liam, this place was nothing more than a temporary stop. Then one morning when the doorbell rang, a group of men entered and filled the apartment with expensive suits and custom-made clothing. His old clothes were pushed aside, replaced by designer jackets, tailored shirts, and shiny leather shoes. His wardrobe was now designed for a CEO's right-hand man. When Liam looked in the mirror, he saw a stranger. He was no longer just a mechanic. Abigail came every day explaining the inner workings of the company, its competitors and employees. She taught him how to behave in the business world, giving him a simple position on paper. But they both knew that wasn't the real reason Liam was there. Things began to change rapidly after a while. A fake CV was prepared for Liam. He was presented as someone with a special background, a person with experience in the business world. His hair was cut differently, his style changed, even his walk. He was now Abigail's most trusted person. Within a few weeks, he joined the security team. But Liam's job was not just to protect the doors. His mission was to find the traitors within the company. To learn who was betraying Abigail, to uncover the enemies hiding in the shadows. But none of this was just about business. At midnight, the woman who appeared to be a strict businesswoman during the day transformed into someone completely different during the private conversations she shared with Liam at night. Fragile but resilient, strong yet profoundly lonely. Secret conversations. While sharing clues about the traitors within the company, sometimes the conversation would unintentionally deepen. Liam, looking at her face, realized they weren't just talking about danger. Stolen smiles. Sometimes, in the middle of a serious conversation, a slight smile would appear on Abigail's lips, catching Liam off guard. It wasn't the ruthless CEO of the business world, but the real Abigail behind the masks. Liam realized that Abigail wasn't just a powerful CEO. He felt that within her, there was a woman carrying deep wounds, silently hiding her pain behind the walls she had built around herself. And he couldn't stop himself from becoming the strongest, yet most fragile part of this woman's world. Within a few weeks, Liam had uncovered the dirty secrets within the company. Every night, he met with Abigail, telling her what he had heard and noticed. But this time what he noticed wasn't just the traitors within the company, it was how Abigail was slowly losing control over her own business. Especially the people in operations management were exploiting Abigail's softer side. The decisions, though not directly against her work ethic, were being presented to her as softened and harmless. Decisions that seemed small but, over time, were changing the company's structure and undermining Abigail's authority. When Liam exposed this manipulative team, Abigail wasted no time and got in touch with the board. With the evidence placed before her, she demanded that the entire department be cleared out. But she didn't stop there, she presented a plan for the future. She proposed hiring young, dynamic, talented employees who had recently graduated from top universities. This way she would not only rid the company of its corrupt structure, but she would also give young minds a chance. This was a huge step for both the company and the new graduates. The board considered the idea, discussed it. And finally everyone agreed. For the first time in a long while, Abigail truly felt her company was safe again. And behind this success were Liam's efforts. That night Abigail came to thank Liam. The office was dimly lit, with a few files still open on the desk, but most of the critical tasks had already been completed. "Thank you for everything, Liam." Abigail's voice was serious, but there was warmth in it. A gratitude that came from within, spoken without her realizing it. Liam looked up, meeting her gaze. This wasn't just business. They both fell silent for a moment. They both knew that this had long since become personal. Abigail took a deep breath, stepped a little closer. Liam's eyes stayed locked on hers. The air shifted in that moment. Abigail's hand gently brushed the table, close to Liam's hand. The distance between them was almost gone. For a brief moment the world stood still. Instinctively, Liam moved closer. Abigail's breath trembled slightly. The closeness scared her, yet gave her an odd sense of security. Liam had been fully present with her. He had seen the dangers she couldn't, watched her back, stayed by her side even in the darkest moments. And now. But at that moment, Abigail pulled away, taking a deep breath, stepping back. "We can't do this," she said, her voice a mere whisper. Liam, suppressing what he was feeling, nodded slightly. There was no anger or disappointment in his eyes. Just the awareness of something that wasn't yet meant to be. Abigail glanced at him, then quickly turned her face away. It felt right. But at the same time it felt very wrong. She was one of the powerful women of the big cities. Liam was just a man working in the mud. Wasn't that how it was? But to Liam she felt more real than ever. Abigail paused for a moment while sitting at her desk, signing the check in front of her. The pen hovered in the air. She had to do this. The closeness had frightened her. They were people from different worlds. That was an undeniable truth. She was a woman accustomed to the power of big cities, a logical thinker. Liam, however, was different. Too honest, too real. And perhaps that was why he was dangerous. She took a deep breath and signed the check. Then she added a small note. "I owe you. Take care of yourself." The words were short and direct, no room for extra sentiment. It shouldn't have been. She sealed the envelope and handed it to her assistant. "Send this right away." When Liam received the check, at first he felt nothing. The amount was large, even life-changing. But the texture of the paper felt cold to him. And when he saw the note, something twisted inside him. "I owe you. Take care of yourself. After everything." Was this all? Was everything just a business relationship? He didn't know the answer. All he knew was that this felt like an ending. When he returned to his garage, everything inside was just as he had left it. But he was not the same man. The smell of motor oil, the old tools, the messy workbench. Everything he had once found peace in now felt just empty. He had money. He had freedom. But now, when he thought about his dreams, he couldn't feel excitement. Because, without realizing it, the thing he had dreamed of had already changed. And it had left him behind. For weeks, Abigail immersed herself in the intense pace of work. Trust had been restored in her company, the traitors were cleared out, and things were back on track. She had done it. But despite everything being in order, the unease inside her never faded. At night, when she sat alone in her office, staring at the messy piles of files on her desk and looking out at the glittering city below, she realized, this life still felt incomplete to her. Work, success, power. These were the cornerstones she had built her life on. But was this really living? One day, after a long meeting with the board, as she sipped her coffee in the quiet office, she asked herself, living for ideals is beautiful, but what about being human? She leaned back in her chair. How much longer could she continue alone? She realized something she didn't want to admit to herself. She missed Liam. His presence, his simple yet sincere glances, how much more he had occupied her life than she had ever thought. The emptiness inside her was growing deeper. Even though she felt secure in the company, the greatest insecurity in her life was her loneliness. And worst of all, was this loneliness her own choice? Or was it just a result of her fears? One day while looking out the window she decided to face that fear. Because she knew she couldn't fight the longing inside her any longer. When Liam heard Abigail's voice, he slowly lifted his head. He stood in the garage's old oil-scented atmosphere, but this time, everything was different. Abigail was here, standing before him. But this time she wasn't here with a business offer, she was here to make a decision. She walked in silently as if carefully weighing her words. Not rushing but with clear determination. She stopped a few steps in front of Liam, her eyes locking with his. "I can leave, I know." There was fragility in her voice, but also an unusual certainty. "But I want to stay." Liam felt the weight of her words. Was this real? Was she really leaving behind her company, the life she had built, her status? "Do you really want this?" he asked, still holding on to some doubt in his eyes. Abigail looked at him for a long time. Then she smiled faintly. But this wasn't the smile of someone who had won, it was the smile of someone who had finally accepted the truth after years of deceiving herself. "I don't want to live in big buildings with fake people anymore." Her voice was calm, but it carried the weight of years. "I want to live with a man who truly lives his life." Liam took a deep breath. Something inside him cracked open, a long-suppressed part of him wanting to break free. But this wasn't easy. He shoved his hands into his pockets, momentarily avoiding her gaze, then turned back to Abigail. "What about your company?" The question he asked wasn't just about her job. What he really wanted to ask was whether she was truly ready for this. Abigail sighed softly, looking down at the floor. She had been expecting this. "The company? It's a strong company. It will survive without me." She paused briefly. "But me? If I stay there, I don't know what will be left of me." She took a deep breath and continued. "Everything there is so big, but nothing is real. People smile for power, greet for money, form friendships for personal gain. And I've shaped myself to be part of that world. But I don't want to continue doing that anymore, Liam." She looked back up at him. "For the first time, I want to be somewhere where I can feel like myself." Liam listened to her quietly. The hesitation in his eyes gave way to understanding. Abigail's move away from her world wasn't just an escape, it was the silent echo of a cry she had kept inside for years. But was this enough to make a decision? Liam stepped closer, his voice soft but clear. "Are you saying this because of fleeting emotions? Or do you really want to belong here?" Abigail smiled faintly. "I don't know." Then, without looking away, she added, "But I want to find out." Liam looked at her for a long time. Perhaps for the first time, he had heard the most honest words about what she truly wanted. And maybe this time it was his turn to ask the questions. Abigail shrugged lightly, never taking her eyes off Liam. With a small, bittersweet yet confident smile tugging at the corners of her lips, she said, "Those who are with me are where I am." This sentence carried the full truth of her life. She was a woman used to control, having built her own world, set the rules, and climbed to the top alone. But for the first time, when she thought about letting go of all that, she realized she wasn't afraid. Because she was tired of walking alone. And this time, she truly wanted someone by her side. Liam looked at her for a long time. He knew she was from a different world. It wasn't an easy choice to leave the towering skyscrapers that ruled the night and walk to a garage smelling of motor oil. But Abigail was here. And that was what mattered. He took a deep breath, his eyes softening, and with a smile that settled on his sharp chin, he nodded slightly. "Then welcome, Abigail." His voice echoed through the garage, but the words held a meaning that transcended the boundaries of a space. Abigail's heart trembled. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she truly belonged somewhere. But she wasn't afraid. Because for the first time, she realized she didn't want to fight to keep someone by her side, she just wanted them to stay. Liam's eyes were deep and resolute, as if reading the hesitation within Abigail. He wasn't trying to understand her because he already did. He wasn't trying to change her because he loved her just as she was. Abigail swallowed, suddenly realizing the courage of the step she had just taken. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice low but filled with sincerity. It was as if there were other things beneath that question. "Are you sure? A mechanic's life could fit into a billionaire's world? Are you sure? You could embrace his real feelings? Are you sure?" You could overcome years of solitude together? But without hesitation, without a moment of doubt, he pulled her close. His fingers intertwined with Abigail's delicate yet strong hands. When the slight calluses on his fingertips brushed against her smooth skin, the reality of life flowed between them like an invisible bond. And he looked into her eyes. Always. They were just 2 words. But within them, there was a truth as strong as a vow, as pure as a confession. Abigail, without averting her gaze even for a second, looked into his eyes. All the question marks, fears, and logical decisions she had made throughout her life fell silent for a moment. Now she only had her feelings. In Liam's eyes, there was neither expectation nor doubt. There was only the pure truth of a man who accepted her, who loved her just as she was. And that night, under the stars, 2 different worlds finally merged. Neither the harsh rules of the business world, nor the scars of the past, nor their differences mattered anymore. Sometimes, even when 2 lives seem impossible to unite, they have to cross paths. Abigail and Liam walked toward a new beginning together. In that moment, Abigail didn't think about her work, her status, or her past. She only thought about Liam. His smile, his touch, the simple reality within all the complexity. Because sometimes the greatest wealth isn't money, it's real love. And so, a mechanic and a billionaire not only fixed an engine, but also repaired each other's lives.